So what we're going to do is really show you how to use your hand to differentiate the intercardinal point system. Essentially what we're going to do is you're going to line your hand up on the bow of the vessel. Your index finger will be the bow, and basically in terms of reporting to starboard, I'm going to use my right hand, and basically I'm going to separate my fingers enough, and basically between those fingers you've got 11 1/4 points. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line my finger up on the bow. I'm going to report dead ahead, 1 point to starboard, 2 points to starboard, 3 points to starboard, and then I'm going to project basically broad, which is perpendicular to my index finger, broad to starboard, okay? So we're going to try that out. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to line up my right hand to report on all of the vessels lined up to starboard. So essentially, as I said earlier, each finger is 11 1/4 points. I've got my index finger representing dead ahead, and right now I've got a vessel lined up 1 point to starboard, and that vessel is about a mile away, so I'm going to let my officer in charge of a navigation watch know that, mate, I've got a vessel 1 point to starboard, using that finger, my middle finger, and I'm going to report its position 1 point to starboard, and it's about a mile away. From there, I have another vessel lined up right over here, and essentially I'm going to report on that. So I line my finger back up, my index finger's lined back up on the bow, and I count 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, and it's lining up more with 3 points to starboard. So essentially I put that finger back on, that index finger back on the bow. Mate, I've got a vessel or a target 3 points to starboard at about 1.25 miles off. Now, if you start to pan right, essentially you see a vessel right to the broad side of the vessel. That's basically perpendicular to the bow. We talked about using our arms as well. So I line one arm up, and I've got this here. I've got this cruise ship, essentially, lined up right broad to starboard, okay? So I started out with the vessel 1 point to starboard, fine to starboard to 1 point to starboard, 3 points to starboard, vessel broad to starboard, and just aft of broad between 3 points and broad to starboard, okay? I am then going to go ahead and look at all my targets to the port side, and I'm going to report on those. I take my left hand, port, left, and I line it up on the bow. My index finger's lined up on the bow. I spread my fingers well enough, and essentially what I do is I count 1 point, 2 points, 3 points broad, and I've got, in this case, probably the vessel right here, which is actually an oil rig. I'm going to call that rig out. Basically, I'm going to call it 2 points to port, and I call into the mate, and I report, mate, I've got a target 2 points to port, about 3/4 mile off. It is an oil rig. I identify it for what it is. I've also got an oil tanker. Looks to me, now that I understand the point system, it looks about 3 points to port. I go ahead and line up my fingers again. 1 point, 2 points, 3 points. Port. Mate, I've got an oil tanker, 3 points to port at about 2 miles off. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we use our fingers in our hands, how to differentiate the intercardinal point system for reporting factors. And that's how we use our hands to report on the intercardinal point system. It's really the best way for us to remember 1 point, 2 points, 3 points broad. And I'll tell you what, if you just go ahead and you line those index fingers up on the bow, 1 point, 2 point, 3 points broad to starboard, my right hand, my left hand, this is dead ahead, 1 point, 2 point, 3 points broad to port. And it's really the easiest way to report as a lookout.